Yeah, you know that I've long been an advocate for the little guy too, and I think it's so your comment about these times, this economy, the effects that we're going to start seeing over the next 90, 120 days and beyond, that is in fact an opportunity for local community-based organizations. One of the things we're seeing, John, obviously, is this, the impact of social distancing and contactless relationships, if you will, contactless interaction. What does the industry need to hear there? What do they need to anticipate? What do they need to do to make the move to make that part of their meaningful business operation, adjusting to that, I guess?
Yeah. So, all right. So at the outset of the interview, you used the term philosopher. So tolerate me for a minute as I give you a weird entry into an answer for this question. So we're all using this phrase "new normal," right? I don't really know what that means. It kind of is like your question before, best practices, normal, best, whatever. I'd rather just call it what it is and say that we're in a new world. We were all forcibly awakened to a new world and a new reality, roughly 120 days ago or something like that. And, ironically, extremely close to the advent of GAC 2020, I would point out, which I don't know if that's significant or not. But anyway, I think we just need to call it what it is, which is a new world. If we're in a new world, I think we need to ask ourselves whether we need a new language, right? Because we have to ask these sort of fundamental questions of whether our old physics and our old economics and our old language, for example, are still useful or relevant or functional. I think we're probably not fully in the new world yet. I think we're probably in a liminal space between the old world and the new world. But I definitely don't subscribe to this idea, new normal. I'm not sure what that means. I definitely believe we're in a liminal space between the old world and the new world. So now I'm going to pick apart inside that framework of us being in this liminal space between the old world and the new world. I'm going to pick apart that word contactless, all right? Because I think it's very dangerous and it could split one of two ways for our industry. The word contactless, and I'm going to use this word contactless, and I'm not even sure if this is going to be intelligible because I'm winging all of this, but I'm going to use this word contactless because it's an example of why we need to be careful about our words and our language in this new world, or in our awareness of being between the old world and the new world. Contactless in the banking sector is a word that existed, right? We had contactless payments. And in fact, Visa spent a ton of money during NFL games to promote contactless payments, right? Likewise, you might also have people who would say, well, we've always been able to do contactless banking. We had online banking, right? And we had, self-service banking. Okay. I'll accept those two things. Contactless payments was a reality. Online banking was a reality. And so we could say those were words in the old world. But we have to realize that these words are tricky, right? Because they imply a world in which they operated. So contactless payments, for example, operates that word was used in a world where it's contactless in comparison to what? To swiping the card or inserting the card into the physical payment device, right? So the word contactless in the banking world was actually used in a understanding of a world where the transaction was still physical, right? So we would say contactless payments, but it's really a misnomer because it was still a physical transaction, okay? Online banking, all right, that's another great one. Online in juxtaposition to what? Or as opposed to what? Well, as opposed to in branch or in person or, physical as the norm. So I think when we see that these words are actually rooted in the past, we have to be really careful about using them in the future because we're like I said, we're not in the same world anymore. And I think that you have to look at deconstructing these ideas that the financial institution itself is the thing or the point of contact for the modern consumer, right? It's not. And I think that and then we also have to deconstruct this idea that the consumer is going to choose what their preferred mode of interaction is, right? So, and that's probably the scarier realization that we need to come to, because I think a lot of marketing and a lot of retail strategy and a lot of product development and product deployment operates on an idea from the old world that the consumer is going to choose physical or digital, right? In other words, contact or no contact. And I don't think that's the world that we're living in anymore, as demonstrated by the last 90 days. We're now living in a world where the consumer as a whole, not just our member, could very well find themselves in a situation where the mode in which they transact or the mode in which they exist is mandated to them. You stay home. You know, your state, your city, your town, whatever, your workplace, you're all staying at home. You have been quarantined, you've been physically distanced, you've been, you know, I believe that will be part of the language and the social contract in our new world, is that the consumer choice for physical or digital is probably no longer as prominent as it was in the way that we develop and deploy products and services. We've got to start thinking about contact or no contact as totally situational for the consumer and not a free choice, right? It's not a liberty that they have anymore. I'm going to pause there because I see you thinking about that.
Yeah. So how does that affect the work that the credit union needs to be doing today in anticipation of that new world where it's not a choice, or it's a choice that's been made for them, I guess, by
Yeah, I've just chosen to use the word situational there. So we have to be aware that the consumer's situation is now sometimes chosen and sometimes mandated, right? But to answer your question about how that impacts our business strategy, if we're still creating business strategies that operate, you know, in that dualist fashion of physical or digital, right? And assume that the consumer is going to choose one of those things, then at any point in time, because of the situation imposed upon our consumer and us, we could be losing half or more of our business strategy, right? So when Deland talks about contactless now, you know, we're not talking about ITMs and online banking and that kind of thing. We're talking about a strategic use of technology and data and digital extension of that to the consumer. That's a radical synthesis of this dualism, right? And realizes that the entire situation around the transaction and the financial needs of the consumer is probably going to be very fluid and potentially chaotic, sometimes free, sometimes authoritarianly imposed upon them, right, in the near future, and probably the middle horizon future. And I think we have to look at the needs of a community for financial flourishing as much more basic than a physical product selection or a digital product selection. And we've got to find a way to synthesize those things and really bridge brick and mortar and digital and anticipate something more archaic or source material than that, you know, and I'm going to issue a bit of an indictment here because this is very near to me, and we as Deland have been writing about this for a long time. Use Google, it's out there. I think we've really dropped the ball on positioning local businesses and local communities and local institutions, local nonprofit organizations. I could go on. We as community financial institutions have been so focused on this dichotomy of online banking or retail branch banking that we've missed this world where our institution isn't even the primary contact point for the consumer anymore. It's these merchants, it's their preferred organization, it's their communal affiliations. And we've totally failed to outfit those entities with the digital tools and the disciplines for use and control of data that will keep our communities flourishing and relevant, right? Because we've all been so worried about what online banking and what LOS to buy and whether to put a Starbucks or a muffin store in our branch, or whether to put ITMs or no ITMs in our branch, that we've failed to see that our physical credit union isn't even the primary point of engagement for the community or the consumer anymore. It's businesses that are desperately in need of allies in the community to help them steward and use data for financial flourishing and consumer engagement. And I think that's the synthesis, right? So if I was going to give practical advice to a board or a CEO, I'd say, hey, let's sit down and have some drinks and talk about, you know, what it's going to look like when you do your next branch build project, and whether you probably need to scrap that language branch build project, because your capital might be better expended outfitting or equipping some other, you know, entity in your community with digital tools and technology to flow data and transactions back to you, than it would be expended building a branch and deciding whether to put 2 or 3 ITMs in it. I just don't think that's a relevant conversation anymore. And I think a practical example of the fallout of that is how many businesses we saw have to shutter their doors in the last 4 months because they just had no way to digitally engage consumers, right? And I guess the question we have to really honestly, candidly, and painfully ask ourselves is, how many of our communities were truly benefited in the last 120 days because of our, decision that we made to have the best shiny online banking that they could log into? It didn't net anything. It didn't produce anything for consumers or communities or economies in the last 120 days. Go ask your favorite local retailer that had to shutter its doors if your, 400-page RFP that you sent out to select a platform and a bill pay vendor helped them. It didn't, right? They needed mobile payments. They needed a self-service kiosk that you helped them acquire and run because you're the expert in secure use and facilitation of financial transactions and data. They needed online ordering. They needed, digital loyalty programs, but they have none of the infrastructure to support that. Whereas you as a financial institution do, right? This is one prong of what we mean by core centric, where you have to radically shift your thinking to putting your financial institution at the core of the needs and desires of consumers and community businesses and organizations that they have in order to financially flourish. And that has nothing to do with online banking or branch banking, right?